12-year-old Ethan Carter wasn't supposed to matter. Just another poor kid collecting cans before dawn in a struggling neighborhood of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, invisible in his worn-out jacket and 2 small sneakers, silently helping his ailing grandfather survive on heart medication they could barely afford. But beneath that quiet exterior burned a fierce intelligence that even he didn't fully recognize. When a school essay unexpectedly sent him to Washington, D.C., fate placed him next to Walter Hayes, a hostile Gulf War veteran harboring dark secrets. No one could have predicted that when Hayes' heart stopped mid-flight, Ethan's desperate CPR would resurrect more than just the old soldier. 6 gasped words would ignite a truth buried for decades by powerful men. Against impossible odds, this forgotten boy from nowhere would unearth a military conspiracy, restore his father's stolen honor, and prove that sometimes the smallest hands can tear down the tallest walls of injustice. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're reading from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning. Air bit at Ethan's fingers as he rummaged through another recycling bin in a Philadelphia alley. His breath formed small clouds in the dawn light while he worked quickly, methodically separating aluminum cans from plastic bottles. This was his daily routine up before the sun, collecting what others had thrown away. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Just $3 more, he whispered to himself, checking his watch. School started in an hour, and he needed to be back home in 20 minutes to help Grandpa Henry with his morning medication. At 12 years old, Ethan Carter shouldered responsibilities that would crush most adults. The recycling money wasn't for video games or candy like other kids his age might save for. It was for the prescription co-pays that kept his grandfather alive. The grandfather who had raised him since his mother succumbed to leukemia when he was only 4. Ethan stuffed the last of his findings into his backpack and began the 15-minute walk home. Their neighborhood wasn't the worst in the city, but it was far from the best. Paint peeled from most row houses, and chain-link fences surrounded patches of concrete that hadn't seen grass in years. But their home, though small and weathered, was immaculate. Grandpa Henry made sure of that. Order is next to dignity, he always said. And we may not have much, but we have our pride. Ethan slipped through the front door quietly, hoping his grandfather was still asleep. No such luck. "That you, kiddo?" Henry's voice called from the kitchen. Despite his heart condition, he always managed to be up making breakfast. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, setting his backpack down. "Just getting some fresh air before school." Henry appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on his walker. At 67, his body was failing him, but his eyes remained sharp and knowing. He took one look at Ethan's backpack and sighed. "Out collecting again. I told you your job is to be a child and get your education." "And my job is to take care of you too," Ethan countered, moving to the sink to wash his hands. "Did you take your morning pills?" Henry's expression softened. "Not yet. Was waiting on you to read the labels. These old eyes aren't what they used to be." This was their dance, Henry pretending he needed help reading labels he'd memorized years ago, and Ethan pretending he didn't know Henry was pretending. It gave him purpose, made him feel necessary. And in truth, on his bad days, Henry really did need the help. After breakfast and making sure Henry had taken his medication, Ethan changed into his school clothes, the same jeans he'd worn all week, and a faded blue t-shirt that had once been much darker. He brushed his teeth, grabbed his homework from the table, and kissed his grandfather goodbye. "Remember what I always say," Henry called as he headed for the door. Ethan smiled. "Kindness can save lives, sometimes literally." "That's right," Henry nodded. "Your grandmother was the kindest woman I ever knew. That's why. She was such a good nurse. And your mother, too." His eyes grew misty for a moment. "Kindness runs in your blood, Ethan. Don't you forget it." The walk to Franklin Middle School took exactly 18 minutes. Ethan timed it every day, knowing that if he left by 7:32, he'd arrive with 10 minutes to spare before the first bell. Timing was everything when your life balanced on such a precarious edge. As he approached the school grounds, he slowed his pace. This was always the hardest part of his day. The building itself wasn't intimidating, just a standard brick structure. with colorful banners promoting school spirit. It was what waited inside that made his stomach clench. "Well, look who it is, garbage boy," came the taunt from Connor Reed, a 7th grader whose father owned a local hardware store. He stood with his usual group of friends near the entrance. "Digging through trash again this morning? Find anything good to eat?" Ethan kept his eyes down and tried to walk past, but Connor stepped in his path. "Hey, I'm talking to you. What's that smell? Oh, wait, it's just you." Connor's friends laughed on cue. "Leave me alone, Connor," Ethan said quietly, trying to step around. "Or what? You'll throw a soda can at me?" Connor reached out and shoved Ethan's shoulder, sending him stumbling back a step. "That's enough, Mr. Reed." The stern voice belonged to Ms. Larson, the 8th grade English teacher. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Unless you'd like to spend your lunch period in my classroom discussing respect." Connor's smirk vanished. "No, ma'am. Then I suggest you find something productive to do with your time." Ms. Larson's gaze remained fixed on Connor until he and his friends retreated inside. Ethan mumbled a thank you as he passed. "Ms. Larson, Mr. Carter," she called after him. "A moment, please." Ethan stopped, worried he was somehow in trouble too. "I read your essay on the giver yesterday," she said. "Your analysis of a society without memory was quite profound for someone your age." Ethan shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "Thank you, ma'am. Have you ever considered entering the regional writing contest? This year's theme is Heroes of America. The deadline is next week. The winner gets a fully paid trip to Washington, D.C. for a youth leadership workshop and a $500 scholarship." Ms. Larson continued, $500, that would cover Grandpa Henry's medication for months. "I'll think about it," Ethan promised. Ms. Larson smiled. "Good. I've left the application form on my desk. Stop by during lunch if you want to pick it up." The morning classes passed in a blur. Ethan excelled in most subjects but kept quiet during discussions. Drawing attention to himself only made the teasing worse. During lunch, while other students filled the cafeteria with laughter and chatter, he slipped into Ms. Larson's empty classroom and took the application form from her desk. Later that afternoon, Henry had an appointment at the VA clinic. He'd worked there as a nurse for 30 years before his health forced him to retire. Now he was a patient waiting in the same rooms where he once provided care. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" he said to Ethan as they sat in the waiting area. "Being on this side of things." Ethan nodded, looking around at the mostly older men and women waiting for their names to be called. His attention was drawn to an elderly white man in a wheelchair near the corner. Unlike the others who chatted in small groups, he sat alone, staring straight ahead with an intensity that seemed to dare anyone to approach. "Who's that?" Ethan whispered to his grandfather. Henry followed his gaze and his expression changed subtly. "That's Walter Hayes, Gulf War vet. Served in 2 tours, I believe. Lost his leg in the second one." "Why is everyone staying away from him?" Henry sighed. "Walter doesn't make it easy for people to help him. Pride's a powerful thing, especially for men who've seen what he's seen." As if sensing they were talking about him, Hayes's head turned slightly in their direction. His eyes, gray and hard as stone, locked with Ethan's for a brief moment before looking away. When Henry's name was finally called, they walked past Hayes's chair. The old man was struggling to balance a stack of paperwork on his lap while maneuvering his wheelchair toward the pharmacy window. "Need a hand?" "With those, Walter," Henry offered kindly. "I got it," he growled, not looking up. The papers slipped scattering across the floor. Henry, despite his own frailty, bent to help gather them. "It's no trouble." "I said I got it," Hayes snapped, his voice sharp enough to make heads turn. "Don't need your charity." Henry straightened slowly, leaning on his walker. "All right, Walter, have it your way." Ethan lingered a moment, watching as the old man struggled to reach the papers from his chair. There was something in Hayes's eyes that didn't match his harsh words, a flicker of pain, or maybe shame. Ethan had seen that look before in his own reflection, on the days when Henry's medication made him too sick to get out of bed, and he felt helpless to make him better. The next day after school, Ethan went to the Philadelphia Public Library. Ms. Thompson, the head librarian, had known him since he was small. His mother used to bring him for story time, and after she died, Ethan kept coming, finding solace in the quiet stacks and endless worlds within the books. "Working on something special today?" Ms. Thompson asked as he settled at his usual table. "A contest essay about American heroes," Ethan replied. "Can I use the reference section?" Ms. Thompson's eyes twinkled. "For my favorite patron?" "Of course." She led him to the locked glass cabinets that housed the library's most valuable books. "Any particular type of hero you're interested in?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Military heroes, I guess. Especially medics." An hour later, surrounded by books on battlefield medicine throughout American history, Ethan was completely absorbed. He read about surgeons tending wounded soldiers during the Civil War, about World War II medics who parachuted into enemy territory, and Gulf War corpsmen who risked their lives navigating desert ambushes to reach the injured. One story particularly gripped him: a black medic in the Gulf War who had crossed enemy lines to treat wounded civilians, then returned to save his entire squad when they were ambushed. The book only mentioned him briefly, but Ethan wrote down his name, James Carter. Over the next few days, Ethan started keeping a scrapbook of heroes, particularly focusing on medics who had saved lives in impossible situations. He worked on his essay during lunch breaks and after helping Henry with dinner. The more he researched, the more fascinated he became with those who had the courage to heal in the midst of horror. On Saturday, Ethan accompanied Henry to a local park near the Schuylkill River, where Henry liked to feed the birds. The fresh air did him good, he insisted, even if the walk tired him out. They sat on a bench by the riverbank, watching ducks glide across the water's surface. "You've been awful quiet these past few days," Henry observed, breaking pieces of bread for the gathering birds. "Something on your mind?" Ethan was about to answer when he noticed a familiar figure at a bench across the river. Walter Hayes, alone as always, struggling to open what looked like a can of soda with arthritic hands. "Be right back," Ethan told his grandfather, then walked around the river's edge until he reached Hayes's bench. The old man didn't look up, still fighting with the can's tab. Ethan stood silently for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife Henry had given him for his birthday. "Excuse me, sir," he said quietly. "Would this help?" Hayes's head snapped up, eyes narrowing with the same defensive glare Ethan had seen at the VA. But when he saw the knife being offered, something in his expression shifted. Not quite softening, but changing. After a long pause, Hayes reached out and took the knife. He popped the tab with the blade's edge, then handed the knife back without a word. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just silent acceptance of the help. Ethan nodded and walked back to his grandfather, who had watched the entire exchange. "That was kind of you," Henry said when he returned. "Didn't do much," Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes the smallest kindnesses matter most," Henry replied, "especially to those who've forgotten what kindness feels like." That evening after dinner, Henry brought out an old CPR dummy, a relic from his nursing days kept in a closet. "What's this for?" Ethan asked, as Henry placed it on the living room floor. "Time you learned proper CPR," he said, easing himself down beside it. "Every person should know how to save a life." For the next hour, he showed Ethan the correct hand position, the right amount of pressure, and the proper rhythm. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths, he instructed. "Keep the blood flowing until help arrives." Ethan practiced until his arms ached. "Why are we doing this now?" he finally asked. Henry's eyes grew distant. "I saved your Uncle Jerome with CPR once. Did I ever tell you that? Found him collapsed in the backyard. Doctor said if I hadn't known what to do, he wouldn't have made it." He patted Ethan's hand. "You never know when you might need it." 2 days later, Ethan submitted his essay to Ms. Larson. He'd written about the courage of battlefield medics throughout American history, with special focus on those who treated everyone, friend or enemy, with equal care. A week passed before Ms. Larson asked him to stay after class. Ethan's stomach knotted, certain he was in trouble for something. Instead, she handed him an envelope with a smile. "Congratulations, Ethan. Your essay won first place." Inside was an official letter confirming his all-expenses-paid trip to Washington, D.C. for the Youth Leadership Workshop, along with a certificate for the scholarship. That night, he showed Henry the letter, his excitement dampened by concern. "I can't go. Who will help with your medication? Who will make sure you're okay?" Henry took Ethan's face in his hands. "Ethan Carter, you listen to me. I was taking care of myself long before you came along. I can manage for 5 days, no buts. This is your chance to see something beyond these 4 walls in this neighborhood." His eyes welled with tears. "You're going to be someone great. Ethan, someone who makes a difference. So you're going, and that's final." The night before his departure, Ethan couldn't sleep. He checked and rechecked his small suitcase, making sure Henry's medication schedule was clearly written out for Mrs. Wilson next door, who'd promised to check in twice daily. "What if something happens while I'm gone?" he asked Henry. As he tucked him in, a role reversal that made him feel like a small child again. "Then it happens," Henry said simply. "But what won't happen is you missing this opportunity because you're worried about your old grandpa." He kissed Ethan's forehead. "Now get some sleep. You've got a big day tomorrow." Morning came too quickly. Ethan's stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and dread as he stood at the airport gate clutching his boarding pass. Henry had insisted on seeing him off despite his fatigue, and now he straightened Ethan's collar one last time. "I've never been on a plane before," Ethan admitted, his voice barely audible over the airport announcements. Henry smiled, reaching into his pocket. "I have something for you." He pulled out a small silver locket on a chain. "This was your mother's. She'd want you to have it now." Ethan's hands trembled as he took it. The locket was simple but beautiful, worn smooth by years of handling. When he opened it, he found a tiny photograph of his mother on one side, young and smiling with a much younger Henry beside her. "For luck," Henry said, helping him fasten it around his neck. "And to remember, you're never really alone." The boarding call came and Ethan hugged his grandfather tightly. "I'll call as soon as I land," he promised. "You better," Henry laughed, wiping a tear. "Now go make us proud." The plane wasn't as crowded as Ethan had feared. He found his seat, a window spot, and stowed his backpack underneath. The seat beside him remained empty as other passengers filed past, and Ethan began to hope he might have the row to himself. Then, just before the doors closed, a familiar figure appeared in the aisle. Walter Hayes, maneuvering awkwardly with a cane rather than his usual wheelchair. A flight attendant helped him with his duffel bag, which he insisted on keeping near his feet, rather than in the overhead compartment. Hayes settled into the seat beside Ethan without a glance of recognition. He wore a faded military cap, pulled low over his eyes, and stared straight ahead as the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Ethan's mind raced. What were the chances? The man he'd been quietly observing for weeks was now sitting inches away, trapped together in a metal tube hurtling through the sky. Should he say something? Pretend they'd never met? The silence stretched uncomfortably between them as the plane taxied down the runway. As they accelerated for takeoff, Ethan gripped the armrests tightly, his knuckles turning white. The sensation of being pushed back into his seat made his stomach lurch. "First flight." Hayes's gruff voice startled him. Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak as the ground fell away beneath them. "Keep your eyes on the horizon," Hayes advised not unkindly. "Helps with the queasy feeling." Ethan did as suggested, fixing his gaze on the distant skyline as it grew smaller. Surprisingly, it helped. "Thank you," he managed once they'd leveled off. Hayes grunted. In response, then returned to his silence. 20 minutes into the flight, Ethan gathered his courage. "I'm Ethan," he said. "Ethan Carter." Hayes's eyes remained fixed forward. "Walter Hayes," he replied after a pause, offering nothing more. Another silence fell. Ethan tried to focus on the clouds outside his window, but his attention kept drifting to Hayes's duffel bag, where a set of worn military tags hung from the zipper. The name was partially visible. L.T.W. Hayes. "Lieutenant?" Ethan murmured without thinking. Hayes's head turned sharply. "What?" "Your tags," Ethan explained, pointing. "They say Lieutenant." Hayes's expression hardened for a moment, then relaxed slightly. "Long time ago," he said. "Another lifetime." The conversation might have ended there, but the plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing it to drop suddenly. Several passengers gasped. A baby started crying. somewhere behind them. Hayes's hands gripped the armrests, his knuckles white, jaw clenched. His breathing changed, becoming shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Sir, are you okay?" Ethan asked, concerned. Hayes didn't seem to hear him. His eyes had taken on a distant, glassy quality. He began muttering under his breath, words Ethan couldn't quite catch. Something about incoming and get down. A flight attendant passing with a drink cart noticed and paused. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, bending closer. "I think he's scared of the turbulence," Ethan explained, not wanting to embarrass the man. The attendant nodded understandingly. "It's just a rough air pocket, sir. Nothing to worry about. Can I get you some water?" Hayes blinked, seeming to return to the present. "I'm fine," he said curtly. "Don't need anything." The attendant smiled professionally and continued down the aisle. Hayes wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, avoiding Ethan's concerned gaze. After several minutes of awkward silence, Ethan spoke again. "Were you in the war?" he asked, quietly. Hayes exhaled slowly. "More than one," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. "Doesn't matter now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. As he flipped through the pages, Ethan caught glimpses of handwritten names, dates, and locations. Some pages had been dog-eared or marked with paper clips. "Are those people you knew?" Ethan ventured. Hayes's thumb stopped on a particular page. "People I served with," he corrected. "Some made it home, some didn't." There was something in his tone that made Ethan's chest tighten, a weight of memory and loss that seemed almost tangible. Before he could respond, Hayes suddenly stiffened. His free hand moved to his chest, clutching at his shirt front. "Sir?" Ethan's voice rose in alarm. Hayes's face contorted in pain. The notebook slipped from his fingers as both hands now clawed at his chest. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a choking sound emerged. Then his body began to shake, eyes rolling back. "Help!" Ethan shouted, jumping to his feet. "Something's wrong with him!" The plane erupted in commotion. Flight attendants rushed down the aisle. Passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. A call went out over the intercom. "If there is a doctor or medical professional on board, please identify yourself to the flight attendants immediately." Two attendants helped lower Hayes to the floor in the small space between rows. One began loosening his collar, while another brought the first aid kit. "Is he having a heart attack?" someone asked. "Check for a pulse," another voice urged. One of the attendants pressed fingers to Hayes's neck, then looked up with a grave expression. "I'm not finding one." "Is there a doctor?" The other attendant called again, desperation in her voice. No one came forward. Ethan stood frozen, watching as the man before him, the gruff, solitary veteran who had occupied his thoughts for weeks, lay motionless on the floor. In that moment, Henry's words echoed in his mind. Kindness can save lives, sometimes literally. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Ethan pushed past the flight attendant and knelt beside Hayes. "I know CPR," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "My grandpa taught me." The attendants exchanged uncertain glances but moved aside. Ethan positioned himself as Henry had shown him, placing his palms on Hayes's chest. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths, he whispered to himself, and began. His first compressions were tentative, uncertain. Was he pushing hard enough? Too hard? Hayes's chest felt rigid beneath his hands, nothing like the practice dummy. "You need to push harder," one attendant advised. "Don't be afraid to break ribs. That's normal in CPR." Ethan nodded and increased the pressure, counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, 4. By 15, his arms were already burning. By 25, sweat dripped from his forehead. After 30, he tilted Hayes's head back, pinched his nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths as Henry had taught him, then back to compressions again and again. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he worked. "Please don't die," he whispered between counts. "Please, please don't die." Minutes stretched like hours. Someone said they were being diverted to the nearest airport. The attendants prepared an emergency oxygen mask. Ethan's arms felt like lead, but he didn't stop. "Come on, Mr. Hayes," he urged through tears. "You have to wake up. Please wake up." Just as Ethan was beginning to lose hope, Hayes's body suddenly jerked. A raspy gasp escaped his lips, followed by a violent cough. His eyes flew open, wild and disoriented. A cheer erupted from the watching passengers. The flight attendants rushed forward with the oxygen mask, securing it over Hayes's face. His chest rose and fell in labored but present breaths. Ethan sat back on his heels, exhausted and overwhelmed. Hayes's eyes found his, confusion giving way to recognition. With trembling fingers, he reached out and grasped Ethan's wrist. The oxygen mask fogged with each painful breath, but Hayes seemed determined to speak. He pulled the mask aside just long enough to rasp 6 words that would change Ethan's life forever. "Your father saved my life too." The mask was replaced immediately, but the words hung in the air between them. Ethan stared in shock, unable to process what he'd just heard. "Your father?" But Ethan had never known his father. Henry rarely spoke of him, saying only that he had died before Ethan was born. There were no photographs, no stories, no details, just an empty space where a father should have been. How could this stranger know anything about him? As the plane began its emergency descent, medical personnel were already waiting on the runway. Everything happened in a blur. Hayes being rushed from the aircraft on a stretcher, paramedics asking Ethan questions about what had happened, flight attendants praising his quick action. "You saved his life," one told him, squeezing his ivory shoulder. "Not many adults would have had the courage to do what you did." But Ethan barely heard the praise. His mind replayed Hayes's words over and over, like a recording stuck on loop. "Your father saved my life too." Those 6 words held answers to questions Ethan hadn't even known to ask. And as he watched the ambulance carrying Walter Hayes speed away from the airport, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The airport buzzed with activity as emergency personnel rushed Walter Hayes through the terminal. Ethan stood frozen in place, those 6 words echoing in his mind. "Your father saved my life too." Time seemed to slow around him as airport staff guided him away from the gate. "You did an amazing thing today, young man," a woman in an airport security uniform said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. The paramedic said if you hadn't started CPR when you did, that gentleman wouldn't have made it. Ethan nodded absently, his thoughts elsewhere. Where are they taking him? "Walter Reed Medical Center, it's the closest military hospital," she explained. "Someone will be in touch with his family." "But I need to talk to him," Ethan insisted, his voice rising with urgency. "He knew my father." The woman gave him a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry, but he needs immediate medical attention. Are you supposed to be meeting someone here? In DC?" Reality came crashing back. The youth leadership workshop, the scholarship, all the reasons he'd gotten on that plane in the first place. "There's supposed to be someone meeting me," he said, pulling the crumpled workshop information from his pocket. From the American Youth Leadership Program. 20 minutes later, a harried-looking man with a clipboard found Ethan in the airport lounge. "Ethan Carter, I'm David Morris, program coordinator. We heard about the emergency landing. Are you all right?" Ethan managed to nod. "I'm fine." "What you did was incredible," David said, checking something off his list. "The workshop doesn't officially start until tomorrow, so we'll get you settled in the dorms tonight. The other students are already there." The drive too. The university campus where they'd be staying was a blur. David kept up a steady stream of conversation, explaining the schedule and activities, but Ethan barely heard a word. His mind was filled with questions that only one person could answer. A.E., man who might not survive the night. Once at the dormitory, Ethan was shown to his room and introduced to his roommate, a gangly boy from Wisconsin named Patrick, who talked excitedly about the Supreme Court tour scheduled for the next day. Ethan nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, but as soon as he could, he excused himself to call Henry. He found a quiet corner in the dormitory lounge and dialed his number with shaking fingers. "Hello?" Henry's voice was a lifeline to normalcy. "Grandpa, it's me," Ethan said, his composure finally breaking. Something happened on the plane. He told him everything, sitting next to Walter Hayes, the heart attack, performing CPR, and finally the mysterious words the man had gasped before being taken away. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Grandpa, are you there?" "Did he say—" Henry's voice trembled in a way Ethan had never heard before. "Did he say your father saved him?" "Yes," Ethan said. "He said, 'Your father saved my life too.'" "Grandpa, what did he mean? You always said you didn't know much about my father." Another long pause. Then the sound of muffled crying. "Grandpa, what's wrong? Please talk to me." "I can't." "Not like this," Henry said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Not over the phone. But I need to check something first," Henry interrupted. "Let me call you back." The line went dead, leaving Ethan staring at his phone in confusion and frustration. 10 excruciating minutes passed before it rang again. "I think," Henry began, his voice steadier now, "I think that man knew your daddy." Ethan sank to the floor, back against the wall. "How? You always said he died before I was born, that he was just someone you knew from the hospital." "I didn't tell you everything," Henry admitted. "I couldn't, it was too painful." "Tell me now," Ethan pleaded. "Please." Henry took a deep breath. "Your father's name was James Carter." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow. James Carter, the medic, the one I read about in the library. "You found him in your research?" Henry sounded surprised. "Yes, he was a combat medic, one of the best. We met after the war when he came to work at the VA hospital, where I was head nurse." Ethan's mind raced. "But why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret?" "Because of how he died," Henry's voice caught. "The official story never sat right with me. They said he abandoned his post, disobeyed orders during a mission. But your father would never do that. He was the most dedicated medic I ever knew." Ethan could hear him moving around, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. "I've kept a box," Henry explained, "things I couldn't bear to look at but couldn't throw away either." "Hold on." There was rustling, then a sharp intake of breath. "I found it," Henry said. "A photograph your father kept. A group of men from his unit. Ethan, there's a man here who looks just like an older version of the veteran you described. The name on the back says LTW Hayes." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "What happened to my father, Grandpa? The real story." Henry's voice grew distant, as if speaking from the bottom of a well. "All I know is there was a mission. That went wrong. James was part of a special extraction team. Something happened, and when it was over, 8 men were dead. James was blamed for abandoning his post, for not following orders. But you didn't believe it." "No," Henry said firmly. "Never. James would have died before leaving a man behind. That wasn't who he was." "So, what really happened?" "I don't know, kiddo. The military closed ranks, said it was classified. They gave me a flag and a medal, and told me he died in an ambush 2 weeks later." His voice hardened. "But they buried more than my son-in-law that day. They buried the truth." Ethan sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. His father wasn't just some unknown figure. He was a hero, a medic, a man whose story had been hidden from him his entire life. "I need to talk to Hayes," he said finally. "He knows what really happened." "Be careful, Ethan," Henry warned, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Truth is powerful and dangerous. Some folks work their whole lives to keep it hidden." After hanging up, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake in the unfamiliar dormitory bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with newfound knowledge. His father had a name now, a face, a story. And somewhere in this city was a man who knew what really happened to him. The next morning, instead of joining the workshop's planned tour of the Supreme Court, Ethan slipped away to the dormitory's computer lab. He searched for information about Walter Hayes, but found little beyond a few military records that confirmed he had served as a lieutenant in the Gulf War. Then he tried searching for information about his father. James Carter, Gulf War medic, brought up several articles about decorated medics, but none mentioned his father specifically. Operation Dust Storm yielded nothing at all. With growing frustration, Ethan composed an email to Ms. Thompson. "Back home. Miss Thompson, I need your help. Could you look through the library archives for anything about a military mission called Operation Dust Storm from the Gulf War era? Also, any information about a combat medic named James Carter. It's really important. Thank you, Ethan." As he hit send, his phone rang. It was Henry. "I've been thinking all night," he said without preamble. "If that man Hayes really knew your father, then he might be the only person alive who knows what really happened. You need to find him." "I'm trying," Ethan assured him. "But how do I get to the hospital? And even if I do, they won't just let me see him." "Use that brain of yours," Henry said. "You're smart, Ethan. Smarter than most adults I know. Figure it out." After hanging up, Ethan approached one of the program coordinators and asked about the status of the man who had the heart attack on his flight. The coordinator made a few calls and learned that Hayes had been stabilized and was recovering. That afternoon, while the other students toured the Library of Congress, Ethan feigned illness and stayed behind. Once alone, he called for a taxi using the emergency credit card Henry had insisted he take. "Walter Reed Medical Center," he told the driver, trying to sound confident despite his racing heart. The hospital was massive and intimidating. Ethan stood before the main entrance, suddenly unsure how to proceed. Security guards checked. IDs at the door. Nurses and doctors hurried past with purposeful strides. How would he ever find Hayes in this maze, let alone get past security? Then he remembered something Henry had told him once. In hospitals, if you act like you belong, most people won't question you. Taking a deep breath, Ethan walked through the main doors with his head high, following a group of visitors. No one stopped him. At the information desk, he heard a woman asking for a patient's room number and noted how the receptionist checked the computer. When it was his turn, he approached with what he hoped was a convincing smile. "I'm here to see my grandfather, Walter Hayes. He was brought in yesterday after a heart attack on a flight." The receptionist typed the name into her computer. "Room 312, East Wing. Visiting hours end at 8 p.m. "Thank you," Ethan said, trying to hide his surprise at how easy it had been. The elevator ride to the third floor gave him time to consider what he would say when he saw Hayes. What questions should he ask first? Would the man even talk to him? Room 312 had a small window in the door. Ethan peered through it and saw Hayes lying in bed attached to various monitors. He looked smaller, more vulnerable than the gruff man from the plane. Taking a deep breath, Ethan knocked softly and entered. Hayes's eyes were closed, but they opened at the sound of the door. For a moment, confusion clouded his features. Then, recognition dawned. "You," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "The boy from the plane." "Ethan," he supplied, moving closer to the bed. "Ethan Carter." Hayes studied him with new intensity. "Carter. But your father was Carter." Ethan nodded. "James Carter. My grandfather's last name is Wilson. I never knew my father's name until yesterday." Understanding passed across Hayes's weathered face. "So you don't know," he said softly. "About what happened?" "No," Ethan admitted, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "My grandfather says the military told him he abandoned his post, that he disobeyed orders and men died because of it." Anger flashed in Hayes's eyes. "Lies," he spat. "All of it. Damn lies." "Then tell me the truth," Ethan pleaded. "Please, I need to know who my father was." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I never forgot him," he said softly. "He ran through fire to save me, and they let him die a traitor." "What happened?" Ethan pressed. Hayes's eyes met his, filled with decades of pain and regret. "I did speak up, told them what really happened. But someone made sure my testimony disappeared." He tried to sit up, wincing at the effort. Ethan hurried to help adjust his pillows. "There's a notebook," Hayes said once he was settled. "Under the bed tray. I've been keeping it for years. Names, dates, memories I couldn't let go." Ethan retrieved a worn leather journal from beneath the tray table. It was the same one Hayes had been looking at on the plane just before his heart attack. "There's an entry," Hayes continued, "from the day after your father died. Read it." With trembling hands, Ethan opened the journal to where a faded ribbon marked a page. The handwriting was cramped but legible. May 17th, 1991. "They buried Carter today. No honors, no acknowledgement of what he did. Captain says we're to forget the whole thing happened. How do they expect me to forget the man who carried me through a mile of desert with a bullet in his own leg? The same man they're now calling a coward. Pierce is backing the official story, says Carter. Disobeyed a direct order, abandoned the extraction point. He's lying. We all know he's lying. Carter was the only one who realized it was a trap. He tried to warn them. When no one listened, he came back for us anyway. I filed my formal statement today, told the full truth. The clerk looked scared when he read it, said it would go up the chain. I don't have much hope. Major Pierce visited me in the infirmary tonight. Said if I knew what was good for me, I'd stick to the official report. Said, some things are bigger than one man's reputation. What's bigger than the truth? Ethan looked up, his vision blurred with tears. They lied about him. Hayes nodded gravely. Politics. The mission was unauthorized. We weren't supposed to be there at all. When it went bad, they needed a scapegoat. Your father was convenient. But why didn't you tell someone? After the war, I tried, Hayes said, his voice hardening. When I got back to the States, I recorded everything, made a full statement on tape. Then someone broke into my apartment and took everything, the tape, my notes, photographs. Left me a warning. Let it go or you'll be next. He reached into the bedside drawer with shaking hands and pulled out a small key. There's a storage unit, he said, pressing the key into Ethan's palm. Outside Arlington, Unit 247. I've kept things there the Army didn't want found. Things about your father, about what really happened. What's there? Ethan asked, clutching the key. Evidence, Hayes replied, including a VHS tape. My confession recorded in 2005 when I thought enough time had passed. I was too afraid to do anything with it. His eyes bore into Ethan's. Maybe you can. The storage facility was a nondescript building in a commercial area just outside Arlington National Cemetery. Rows of identical orange doors lined the concrete structure, each marked with black numbers. Unit 247 was near the back, away from the main office. Ethan's hand trembled as he inserted the key into the padlock. It turned with a satisfying click and the lock fell open. He slid the door upward, revealing a small space filled with cardboard boxes, an old filing cabinet and several military trunks. The musty smell of long, undisturbed papers filled his nostrils as he stepped inside. Where to begin? There were dozens of boxes, each potentially containing pieces of his father's story. His phone rang, startling him in the silence. It was Miss Thompson from the library. Ethan, I got your email. I've been digging through our archives all morning. Did you find anything? He asked eagerly. Yes and no, she replied. There's very little about Operation Dust Storm in the public record, just a brief mention in a declassified report about failed extractions. But there's a footnote that caught my attention. Testimony withheld, Lieutenant Walter Hayes. Ethan's heart raced. That matches what Hayes told me. His testimony was suppressed. There's more, Ms. Thompson continued. I found an old newspaper article about a medic who was posthumously reprimanded for disobeying orders. The name is there, James. A. Carter. That's my father, Ethan confirmed, but it's not true. Hayes says he was a hero, that he saved everyone. Be careful, Ethan, Ms. Thompson cautioned. If what you're saying is true, people went to great lengths to bury the story. That means they wanted it to stay buried. After hanging up, Ethan began methodically searching through the storage unit. The first box contained old military manuals and maps, nothing immediately useful. The second held photographs, dozens of them showing young men in desert fatigues, some smiling, others staring grimly at the camera. In one photo, Ethan recognized Hayes, younger and standing on two good legs, his arm around another soldier. With a jolt, Ethan realized the other man must be his father. They had the same eyes, the same determined set to their jaw. On the back, someone had written Carter and Hayes, Kuwait, 1990. The filing cabinet yielded more treasures, dog tags, letters, medical reports. Ethan read with growing amazement about his father's numerous acts of bravery, the lives he'd saved, the risks he'd taken. How could such a man have been branded a coward? In the third box, beneath a layer of old uniforms, Ethan found what he was looking for. A VHS tape in a clear plastic case labeled in faded marker, Confession, Hayes, 2005. He carefully placed the tape in his backpack, along with the photographs and several of the most important documents. As he was about to leave, something caught his eye, a small metal box at the back of the unit. Inside was a set of dog tags and a sealed envelope, addressed simply to my son if I don't come back. With shaking hands, Ethan tucked the envelope into his pocket. His father's last words to him, words he was never meant to read, now rested against his heart. As he pulled the storage unit door down and replaced the padlock, a vehicle pulled into the lot. A black SUV with tinted windows. It moved slowly past the rows of units as if searching for something or someone. Instinctively, Ethan ducked behind a large dumpster, watching as the SUV came to a stop directly in front of Unit 247. Two men in dark suits emerged and examined the lock. "It's been opened recently," one said to the other. "We might be too late." "Check the security cameras," the second man replied. "Let's see who's been here." Ethan's blood ran cold. These men weren't here by coincidence. Somehow they knew about the storage unit, and they wanted what was inside. As they walked toward the main office, Ethan seized his chance, slipping away between the buildings and running until his lungs burned. Back at the dormitory, he called Henry immediately. "Someone else knows about the storage unit," he said, without preamble. "Men in suits. They came right after I left." "Did they see you?" Henry asked, his voice tense with worry. "I don't think so, but they're going to check security cameras." "You need to be careful, Ethan," Henry said, more careful than ever. He paused. "What did you find?" "Everything, Grandpa. Photos of my father, letters, reports about missions he served on." Ethan's voice broke. "And a tape. Hayes recorded his testimony about what really happened." "Can you watch?" It's a VHS. I need to find a player." Ethan thought for a moment. Ms. Thompson might have one at the library. "Call her," Henry urged, "but be careful what you say on the phone. If these people are serious about keeping the past buried, they might be listening." After hanging up, Ethan called Ms. Thompson again, choosing his words carefully. "I found some old home movies," he said, "but they're on VHS. Do you still have players at the library?" Ms. Thompson understood immediately. "Yes, in our media room. If you can get them to me, I can digitize them for you." "I'll find a way," Ethan promised. That evening, while the other students attended a lecture on constitutional law, Ethan snuck out again. He took a series of buses across the city, constantly checking to make sure he wasn't being followed, until he reached the post office. There he carefully packaged the VHS tape and sent it overnight to Ms. Thompson's home address. Not the library, just in case. The next morning, Ms. Thompson called, her voice tight with tension. "I got your package," she said, "and I've watched the tape." "What's on it?" Ethan asked, finding a quiet corner of the dormitory lounge. "It's Walter Hayes, much younger, giving testimony about what happened during Operation Dust Storm." She took a deep breath. "Ethan, according to Hayes, your father saved everyone in that unit. Hayes says, and I quote, 'James Carter saved us all. They told me to say he disobeyed orders, but he was the only one who didn't.'" Ethan's heart swelled with pride and pain in equal measure. "There's more," Ms. Thompson continued. "Hayes names names, specifically a Major Kenneth Pierce, who apparently gave the orders that sent them into a trap. According to Hayes, your father recognized it was a trap and tried to warn them, but was overruled. When everything went bad, he went back in to save the men who'd been left behind. And for that, they called him a traitor," Ethan said, bitterly. "Yes, but here's where it gets complicated. This Major Pierce, he's not a major anymore. I did some searching online. He's now General Kenneth Pierce, a high-ranking Pentagon official." The implications hit Ethan like a physical blow. If Pierce had risen to such heights, he'd have every reason to keep the truth about Operation Dust Storm buried, and the key: power to do it. "I'm sending you the digitized video now," Ms. Thompson said. "I've uploaded it to a secure server. The link is coming to your email. But Ethan, be very careful who you share this with." After receiving the link, Ethan forwarded it to Henry along with a simple message: the truth about Dad. Minutes later, his phone rang. "I'm watching it now," Henry said, his voice thick with tears. "Oh, Ethan, your father, he was exactly the man I always told you he was. A hero." Through his sobs, he managed to say, "Your daddy died for truth." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind was too full of everything he'd learned, everything he still needed to know. Around midnight, he slipped out of the dormitory and took a taxi back to the hospital. He had to talk to Hayes again. But when he arrived, at room 312, it was empty. The bed was made, the monitors silent. A nurse passing in the hallway noticed his confusion. "Are you looking for Mr. Hayes?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "Where is he?" The nurse frowned. "He was transferred late last night. Some kind of military medical facility. Very hush-hush. The orders came from above." "Was he worse? Did he have another heart attack?" The nurse lowered her voice. "That's the strange thing. He was improving. His numbers were good. There was no medical reason to move him." She glanced around before adding, "He's not sick enough. For that kind of place, someone doesn't want him talking." As Ethan left the hospital, the weight of what was happening settled over him like a shroud. His father's reputation had been deliberately destroyed, evidence had been suppressed, and now Hayes, the one man who could testify to the truth, had been quietly removed from public access. The men who had come to the storage unit, the sudden transfer of Hayes to a restricted facility, these weren't coincidences. Someone powerful knew that Ethan was digging into the past, and they were moving quickly to stop him. But they were too late. The truth was already free, digitized and uploaded to a server where it couldn't be so easily destroyed. The question now was, what should he do with it? As dawn broke over Washington, D.C., Ethan made his decision. He would not let his father's story remain buried any longer. He would not let the powerful silence the truth. Opening his laptop, he began to type an email to Ms. Thompson. "I need one more favor. Do you know any journalists who might be interested in a decades-old military cover-up?" It's time the world knew the truth about James Carter. Morning light filtered through the dormitory blinds as Ethan paced the small room, his mind racing. His roommate Patrick had already left for the day's workshop activities, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the weight of his discoveries. His email to Ms. Thompson had been sent hours ago, but there was no response yet. Waiting felt impossible. Every minute that passed was another minute his father's name stayed tarnished. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" He typed back quickly, scared but determined. "Have you watched the whole video?" 3 times came Henry's reply. "Your father was everything I always believed he was." Ethan clutched the phone tightly, drawing strength from his words. He hadn't yet opened the envelope addressed to him from his father. He wasn't ready. Some truths needed to be faced in the right moment. His phone rang suddenly, startling him. It was Ms. Thompson. "I got your email," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking about your question, and I believe I know someone who can help. His name is Marvin Rhodes, a retired journalist, who once covered military affairs. He wrote about the Gulf War extensively." "Would he be interested in this story?" Ethan asked, hope rising in his chest. "I already called him," Ms. Thompson replied. "I didn't give details, just said I had a young friend with evidence of a Gulf War-era military cover-up. He's intrigued." "Is he trustworthy?" "Marvin has spent his entire career exposing uncomfortable truths, and he's not afraid of powerful enemies," she said. She paused. "There's something else. I did some digging into Operation Dust Storm. Years ago, Marvin tried to investigate it himself, but hit a wall of classified documents and uncooperative sources. He'll be very interested in what you found." Ethan's heart raced. "Can you connect us?" "He's expecting your call. I'll text you his number." After hanging up, Ethan's phone buzzed with the promised contact information. He stared at it for a long moment, gathering his courage. This call could change everything, not just for him, but for his father's legacy. He dialed the number. Marvin Rhodes answered in a deep, gravelly voice. "Mr. Rhodes, my name is Ethan Carter. Ms. Thompson from the Philadelphia Public Library gave me your number. She said you might be interested in hearing about Operation Dust Storm." A pause. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Why don't you tell me what you know, young man?" For the next 15 minutes, Ethan outlined everything he'd learned. His father's true identity, Hayes's testimony, the VHS confession, the storage unit, and the men who had come looking for it. Marvin listened silently, occasionally asking for clarification, but otherwise letting Ethan tell the story uninterrupted. "You have the digitized video?" he asked when Ethan finished. "Yes, Ms. Thompson uploaded it to a secure server." "Send me the link," Marvin instructed. "And those documents you found, can you scan them?" "I'll find a way," Ethan promised. "One more thing," Marvin added, his tone growing serious. "You need to understand what you're getting into, son. If what you're telling me is true, powerful people have worked for decades to keep this buried. They won't stop now just because a 12-year-old boy started asking questions." "I know," Ethan said quietly, "but it's my father's name, his honor. I can't just walk away." "Your father would be proud," Marvin said. "Send me everything you have. I'll start making calls." After hanging up, Ethan forwarded the video link to Marvin, then used his laptop to scan the documents he'd taken from the storage unit. The photos of his father, young, proud, standing alongside his fellow soldiers, brought tears to his eyes. This man who had carried Hayes through a mile of desert with a bullet in his own leg was his father, a hero, not a traitor. As he worked, a notification popped up on his phone, an email from the youth workshop coordinators. He'd missed 2 days of activities now, and they were concerned about his whereabouts. A mandatory meeting was scheduled for that evening to discuss his participation issues. Ethan grimaced. The workshop seemed trivial now compared to what he'd discovered, but he couldn't afford to be sent home early, not when he was so close to uncovering the full truth. He sent a quick reply apologizing for his absence, claiming he'd been ill but was feeling better now. He promised to attend the evening meeting and all activities moving forward. With that handled, he turned his attention back to scanning the documents. Just as he finished the last one, his phone rang again. It was Marvin. "I've watched the video," the journalist said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. "This is explosive, Ethan. Hayes' testimony directly contradicts the official record, and he names names, high-ranking names. Can you publish it?" "Not yet, not without corroboration. One man's testimony, even on video, isn't enough to overturn an official military finding," Marvin said. He paused. "But it's a start. A damn good start. What do we do next?" "I'm going to reach out to some of my old contacts, people who served in the same region during that time. Meanwhile, I need you to go back to the hospital. Find out exactly where they transferred Hayes. We need to talk to him directly." Ethan's stomach knotted. The nurse said it was some kind of restricted military facility. "Find out which one," Marvin insisted. "And Ethan, be careful. If anyone asks why you're looking for him, say you just want to thank the man whose life you saved, nothing more." After promising to be cautious, Ethan hung up and headed back to the hospital. The same nurse from the night before was on duty, but she had no additional information about Hayes' transfer, only that the orders had come from above and that the ambulance had arrived in the middle of the night. Frustrated but undeterred, Ethan was about to leave when he spotted a familiar face at the nurse's station, the flight attendant from the plane, visiting another patient who had fallen, ill during a subsequent flight. "You're the boy who performed CPR," she exclaimed when she saw him. "I've been telling everyone about you. Such bravery." Ethan smiled shyly. "Thank you. I was just checking on Mr. Hayes, but they say he's been transferred." The flight attendant nodded. "I heard about that. One of the paramedics who came for him mentioned Walter Reed Army Medical Center's secure wing. Very hush-hush. They wouldn't even let the regular staff assist with the transfer. Walter Reed's secure wing. It wasn't much, but it was something." Ethan thanked her and left immediately, calling Marvin with the information. "That's a start," Marvin said. "I have contacts at Walter Reed. Let me see what I can find." Out. That evening, Ethan attended the mandatory workshop meeting as promised. The coordinator, David, expressed concern about his absences, but seemed satisfied with Ethan's apology and promised to participate fully going forward. "We have a big day tomorrow," David reminded the group. A tour of the Pentagon followed by a meeting with several military officials to discuss leadership in public service. The Pentagon, where General Kenneth Pierce worked, the man who, according to Hayes, had ordered Ethan's father and his unit into a trap, then covered it up by blaming the one man who had tried to save them all. Ethan's pulse quickened. Perhaps this wasn't just a coincidence. Perhaps it was an opportunity. Back in his dorm room, he called Marvin again. The workshop is touring the Pentagon tomorrow, he explained. Is there any way to find out if Pierce will be there? Leave that to me, Marvin replied. I've been making progress on my end. I've located 2 other veterans from your father's unit who are still alive. One refuses to talk, but the other, William Tate, they called him Red, hinted he knows something. I'm driving to Baltimore tomorrow to interview him. What about Hayes? My contact at Walter Reed confirmed he's in the secure wing, but access is restricted to authorized personnel only. They've classified him as suffering from stress-induced psychosis, claiming his heart attack triggered delusions about his military service. That's a lie, Ethan protested. Of course it is, Marvin agreed grimly. It's a convenient way to discredit anything he might say. We need more evidence, Ethan. Something irrefutable. After hanging up, Ethan finally gathered the courage to open the envelope his father had left for him. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat but hurried. To my son, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I hope your mother has told you about me, about the work I did and why it mattered. I hope she told you I tried to save lives, not take them. There's something happening here that I don't fully understand. Orders that don't make sense, missions that seem designed to fail. I've voiced my concerns, but no one's listening. Tomorrow, we go out again. I have a bad feeling about this one. If my instincts are right, I'll do what I've always done, my job. I'll save who I can, no matter the cost. Know this, whatever they might say about me later, I never abandoned my post. I never left a man behind. Remember that. I'm sorry I won't get to see you grow up, but I hope someday you'll understand why I had to do what I did. Your father, James. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he read the words, perhaps the only words his father had ever directed specifically to him. The letter confirmed everything Hayes had said. His father had sensed the trap and tried to warn others. When no one listened, he did his job anyway, saving lives, including Hayes's. Ethan carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Tomorrow, he would tour the Pentagon. Perhaps he would even come face to face with the man who had destroyed his father's reputation and robbed Ethan of ever knowing him. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it filled him with a quiet, determined rage. Morning sunlight glinted off the Pentagon's massive facade as Ethan and the other workshop students filed off their bus. Security was tight, IDs checked, bags searched, a guide assigned to escort them through the labyrinthine corridors of the world's largest office building. Ethan had barely slept, his mind churning with plans and possibilities. Shortly before leaving the dorm, he'd received a text from Marvin. Pierce is in the building today. Corner office, E-ring, 3rd floor. Be careful. As their tour progressed, through displays of military history and technological achievement, Ethan paid close attention to their location, mentally mapping their route. The guide explained they would be meeting with several officers in the afternoon to discuss military leadership, but no names were mentioned. During a bathroom break, Ethan checked his phone and found another message from Marvin. Published preliminary article online. Title, The Boy, the Veteran and the Forgotten War Crime Cover-Up. Included edited clip of Hayes' video. Already getting traction. Ethan's heart raced. It had begun. The truth was starting to emerge. By lunchtime, their group had reached a cafeteria on the 2nd floor. As they ate, Ethan noticed several people hunched over phones and tablets, expressions concerned or confused. One woman nearby was watching a video with the volume low, but Ethan recognized Hayes' voice. "What's going on?" he asked Patrick, gesturing toward the growing number of people checking their devices. Patrick, always plugged into social media, quickly pulled out his phone. "Some story is going viral," he said, scrolling through. "Hex, something about the Gulf War and a cover-up. There's a video of some old guy saying the military lied about a mission." He looked up. "People are pretty worked up about it." The article was spreading faster than Ethan had anticipated. He excused himself to use the restroom again, this time calling Marvin. "It's everywhere," Marvin confirmed when he answered. "Military forums, veteran groups, social media. The video clip has been viewed over 100,000 times in just 2 hours. Has there been any official response? The Pentagon press office issued a statement calling the video unauthenticated and saying they're looking into the matter. But here's where it gets interesting. Veterans are coming forward in the comments. 3 so far who claim they served with your father. One wrote, "I was there, this is real." Ethan leaned against the wall, momentarily overwhelmed. "What about the man you went to interview?" "Red. He's agreed to talk on the record," Marvin said. "And Ethan, he claims your father gave him something before that final mission, something he's kept all these years." Before Ethan could ask what it was, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside the restroom. Raised voices, hurried footsteps. "I have to go," he whispered into the phone. "Something's happening." When he emerged, the tour group was being hastily shepherded toward the exit by flustered guides. Security personnel moved with purpose through the corridors, speaking urgently into radios. "What's going on?" Ethan asked Patrick as they were ushered along. "No idea," Patrick replied. "They just said the tour is being cut short, due to an emerging situation." As they approached the main exit, Ethan spotted a television in a waiting area. A news anchor was speaking earnestly, a photo of Hayes displayed beside her. Below ran the caption, "Vietnam veteran claims decades-long cover-up of war crime." The storm had broken faster than anyone expected. Back at the dormitory, the workshop coordinators called an emergency meeting. "Due to unforeseen circumstances," David announced, looking distinctly uncomfortable, "tomorrow's activities have been adjusted. The meeting with military officials has been postponed." Whispers rippled through the group. Most of the students had by now heard about the viral story, though none connected it to Ethan. In his room, Ethan found dozens of messages from Marvin, Henry, and even Ms. Thompson. The story had exploded. News outlets were picking up Marvin's article. Veterans groups were demanding answers. Congressional representatives were calling for an investigation. Ethan was scrolling through the updates when his phone rang. It was Henry. "Ethan," he said, his voice weak and strained. "I'm in the hospital." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What happened?" "Just got a little overwhelmed with everything," Henry said, clearly trying to sound stronger than he felt. "The neighbors found me passed out. Doctor says my blood pressure spiked." "This is my fault," Ethan said, guilt washing over him. "I should never have started this." "Don't you dare say that." Henry's voice suddenly found its strength. "This is about your father's honor, about justice. You did exactly what needed doing." "But your health has been failing for years," Henry interrupted. "That's life, kiddo, but what you're doing, that's legacy." He paused, then added softly, "Don't let them silence your father again. You hear me? You fight." After promising to call again in the morning, Ethan hung up. His determination renewed despite his worry for Henry. He returned to the flood of messages and updates. Marvin had been busy. His initial article had been picked up by a national news outlet, adding legitimacy and reach to the story. The Pentagon's dismissive statement about an unauthenticated video had backfired spectacularly when 3 more veterans came forward confirming Hayes' account. Most significantly, a former clerk from the Military Records Office had contacted Marvin, claiming to remember General Pierce, then Major Pierce, personally requesting that Hayes' testimony about Operation Dust Storm be sealed indefinitely. For national security reasons. The story was gaining momentum by the hour. Social media was ablaze with the hashtag #JusticeForCarter. Protesters had begun gathering outside the Pentagon and the VA hospital where Hayes was being held. Late that night, Ethan received an encrypted email from an anonymous sender. The message was brief. "There is a second recording. Your father sent it to his best friend before the mission. It's in a Bible he gave to William Red Tate. Find Red, find the Bible." Ethan immediately forwarded the message to Marvin, who confirmed that Red was the very veteran he'd interviewed earlier that day in Baltimore. "He didn't mention a Bible," Marvin wrote back. "But he was drunk and evasive. We need to see him again tomorrow." The next morning, workshop activities were completely cancelled. Most students took the opportunity to explore the city, but Ethan slipped away to meet Marvin at a coffee shop near Union Station. The journalist looked like he hadn't slept, eyes bloodshot, yesterday's clothes rumpled, but an undeniable energy radiated from him nonetheless. "The story's everywhere," he said without preamble. "Every major news outlet. The Pentagon's in damage control mode. Pierce hasn't made any public statements, but sources say he's cooperating with an internal review." "What about Hayes?" Ethan asked. "Still under lockdown, but the pressure is building to release him. Veterans groups are organizing a vigil outside Walter Reed." Marvin pulled out his laptop and showed Ethan the coverage. Dozens of articles, television segments, radio discussions. In just 24 hours, Operation Dust Storm had gone from a buried footnote to the center of a national controversy. "We're driving to Baltimore," Marvin said, closing his laptop. "Red needs to be sober when we talk to him again, and he needs to tell us about that Bible." The drive to Baltimore took longer than expected due to unusually heavy traffic. When they finally arrived at the homeless shelter, where Red had been staying, they were told he had left hours earlier. "Said he needed to get something from storage," the shelter manager explained. "Seemed in a hurry." After checking 3 more shelters, they finally found Red sitting on a bench in a small park, clutching a worn, leather-bound Bible. He was a thin man with wispy white hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent too many years outdoors. Despite the warm day, he wore multiple layers of clothing as if perpetually cold. "You're back," he said when he saw Marvin. His gaze shifted to Ethan, eyes narrowing. "Who's the kid?" "This is James Carter's son," Marvin explained, gently. Red's roomy eyes widened. "Carter's boy." He studied Ethan's face intently. "Yeah, I see it now. You got his eyes." "We know about the Bible," Ethan said, "about what my father gave you before the mission." Red clutched the book tighter. "Kept it safe all these years. James said if anything happened to him, I should keep it hidden. Said someday someone might come looking for the truth." His voice cracked. "Been a long time waiting." Slowly, reverently, he opened the Bible. The inside had been hollowed out, creating a small compartment. From it, he withdrew a mini cassette tape. "He recorded this the night before," Red explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Said it was for his wife and unborn child in case the worst happened." "Why hide it?" Marvin asked. "Because he also talked about the mission, about his concerns, about orders that didn't make sense." Red handed the tape to Ethan. "He trusted me to keep it safe until it was time. Guess that time is now." Ethan stared at the small tape in his palm, his father's voice, preserved for decades, waiting to be heard. A final testimony from beyond the grave. "There's a recorder in my car that can play this," Marvin said softly. "Are you ready to hear your father's voice?" Ethan nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. After all these years, all the lies and cover-ups, his father would finally have the chance to tell his own story. The truth that had been buried for so long was about to be fully unearthed. The tape player in Marvin's car crackled to life as the small cassette began to play. Ethan held his breath, hands trembling in his lap as he waited for the voice he'd never heard, the voice of his father. "This is Sergeant James A. Carter, Medical Corps, recording on May 2nd, 1991. The voice was deep, resonant, with a gentle Philly accent that reminded Ethan of Henry. There was a steadiness to it, a quiet confidence that instantly made Ethan sit straighter. "Helen, my love, if you're hearing this, then I didn't make it back. I'm so sorry. You deserved better than a husband who left you to raise our child alone." A pause, the sound of a deep breath being taken. "And to my child, I don't even know if you're a boy or a girl yet. I hope someday you'll understand why I had to do what I'm about to do." Ethan's throat tightened, tears welling in his eyes. His father had made this recording months before he was born, speaking words meant only for him to hear decades later. "Tomorrow we're being sent into the Al-Anbar province on what they're calling a high-value extraction. But the intelligence doesn't add up. The coordinates we've been given are in a known hostile area, heavily defended. I've raised my concerns with Lieutenant Hayes, and he agrees something's off, but Major Pierce has overruled us both." Another pause, longer this time. "If you're hearing this, it means the truth is finally coming out. I never ran. I saved my men, and if they kill me for that, so be it. Ethan never stopped telling the truth." Ethan gasped. His father had said his name, had somehow known he would have a son named Ethan. Helen always liked that name, the voice continued, as if answering Ethan's unspoken question. Said if we had a boy, she wanted to name him Ethan after her grandfather. There was the sound of movement, papers rustling. I've documented everything about this mission, the orders, the intelligence reports, my own observations. I'm giving copies to Red and to Hayes. If I don't make it back, if something happens out there, they'll know what to do. A door slammed somewhere in the background of the recording. I have to go, final briefing. His father's voice softened. Helen, I love you more than life itself. And to my child, I'm sorry I won't get to see you grow up. But know that every life I save out there, I save for you, so you'll know your father stood for something, that he did what was right no matter the cost. The tape clicked to its end. Silence filled the car. Ethan wiped tears from his cheeks, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully name. Grief for the father he never knew, pride in the man he had been, anger at those who had stolen him away and tarnished his memory. He knew, he whispered finally. He knew the mission was a trap. Marvin nodded gravely. And he went anyway because it was his duty to save lives. Then, when it all went bad, they made him the scapegoat. The journalist's weathered face hardened. But now we have his testimony too, not just Hayes's. This changes everything. Back in the city, Marvin took the tape to a studio where it could be properly digitized and enhanced. By evening, both recordings, Hayes's confession and James Carter's final message, had been uploaded to the same secure server and shared with select media outlets. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Pentagon's initial dismissal of Hayes's testimony crumbled in the face of Carter's own words. Military analysts on news programs confirmed that the coordinates and details Carter mentioned matched classified records of Operation Dust Storm. Veterans groups mobilized, staging larger protests at the Pentagon and Walter Reed. The hashtag #AllJusticeForCarter trended nationwide. Congressional representatives from both parties called for formal hearings. Late that night, Ethan received a call from the hospital where Henry was staying. His condition has worsened, the doctor explained gently. The stress has taxed his heart. He's asking for you. I'm in Washington, Ethan said, panic rising in his chest. I can't. I've arranged for a flight, Marvin cut in, having overheard. We can be there by morning. The overnight flight was a blur of anxiety and prayers. Ethan clutched his father's dog tags, which he'd taken from the storage unit, drawing strength from the connection to a man he was only now beginning to know. At the hospital, Henry looked smaller than Ethan remembered, frailer, the machines, around his bed beeping in steady rhythm, but his eyes lit up when he saw Ethan. There's my brave boy, he whispered as Ethan rushed to his side. I'm so sorry, Ethan said, taking his hand. This is all my fault, the stress, the excitement. Hush now, Henry interrupted, squeezing his fingers with surprising strength. I've lived a long life, Ethan. Long enough to see my grandson become a man his father would be proud of. His eyes moved to Marvin, standing respectfully by the door. You must be the journalist. Thank you for helping my boy. The honor is mine, sir, Marvin replied, inclining his head. Your son-in-law was a hero. The world is finally learning that truth. Henry smiled weakly. I always knew. Even when they handed me that folded flag and told me lies about how he died. He turned back to Ethan. Have you watched the tape? Ethan nodded, tears threatening again. He knew my name, Grandpa, before I was even born. He was so certain we'd have a boy, Henry said, his eyes distant with memory. Said he could feel it. Wanted to name you Ethan after my father, a man who stood up for what was right no matter what. His gaze sharpened, just like you're doing now. For the next 3 days, Ethan barely left Henry's side, reading to him from his father's letters, showing him news coverage of the growing scandal. The hospital staff brought in a television so they could watch as the Pentagon finally announced a formal investigation into Operation Dust Storm and the subsequent handling of Sergeant Carter's record. On the 4th morning, Ethan was dozing in the chair beside Henry's bed when a commotion in the hallway woke him. A nurse appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of surprise and confusion. There's someone here to see you, she said. He was quite insistent. Behind her appeared Walter Hayes in a wheelchair but alert and determined, a nurse from Walter Reed hovering nervously at his side. "They let me out," he announced without preamble. "Seems stress-induced psychosis isn't a convincing diagnosis when the whole country's demanding answers." Hayes' grey eyes found Ethan's, a flicker of gratitude in them. "You did this, kid. You brought the truth to light." Ethan stood, stunned to see Hayes alive and here in Henry's hospital room. "How did you—" he began, but Hayes cut him off with a raised hand. Veterans groups got loud. Media got louder. They couldn't keep me locked away without raising more questions. His voice was still raspy from his ordeal, but there was a strength behind it now. "I came to thank you, and to finish what we started." He turned to Henry, his expression softening. "You're Henry Wilson, aren't you? James's father-in-law." Henry, propped up in his hospital bed, nodded weakly. "I am. And you're the man who knew my son-in-law for who he really was." Hayes inclined his head. "He saved my life twice, once in the desert, once by giving me a reason to keep fighting. Now—" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to Ethan. "This is my formal statement, rewritten for the congressional hearing. They're calling me to testify next week. I want you there, kid. You and your grandpa, if he's strong enough." Ethan unfolded the paper, scanning the typed words. It detailed everything Hayes had told him: Operation Dust Storm, the trap, James Carter's courage, Major Kenneth Pierce's orders, and the subsequent cover-up. "You're going to tell them everything?" Ethan asked, looking up. Hayes nodded grimly. "Every damn word. They can't silence us all." Marvin, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "I've arranged for the tapes, both yours and James's, to be submitted as evidence. Red's agreed to testify too. And there's more. Another veteran, Samuel Brooks, contacted me last night. He was a radio operator on the mission. Says he overheard Pierce arguing with Carter about pulling back but ignored the warning." Ethan's heart raced. The pieces were falling into place, a truth buried for 34 years finally emerging. Henry squeezed Ethan's hand. "You see, kiddo, you started something unstoppable." His voice was faint, but his eyes burned with pride. "Your father's name will be cleared." Ethan nodded, tears welling. "I just wish you could be there to see it." Henry smiled faintly. "I'll be watching one way or another." The nurse from Walter Reed cleared her throat. "Mr. Hayes, we need to get you back for your follow-up." Hayes grumbled but allowed himself to be wheeled out, pausing at the door to look back at Ethan. "You're your father's son, kid. Don't ever forget that." Over the next few days, the story continued to dominate national news. Marvin's articles, now syndicated across major outlets, detailed the growing evidence against Pierce. Social media buzzed with Fotcher's justice for Carter, and protests swelled outside military facilities. Ethan, torn between Henry's bedside and the unfolding events, received daily updates from Marvin. The Pentagon, under mounting pressure, announced that General Pierce had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 2 more veterans came forward, corroborating Hayes's and Red's accounts. Ethan's dorm room became a makeshift command center with Patrick, now in awe of his roommate's role in the scandal, helping field messages from journalists and supporters. On the 5th day, Henry's condition deteriorated further. The doctors warned Ethan it might be a matter of hours. That evening, as Ethan sat holding his grandfather's hand, Henry stirred. "Read me one of your father's letters," he whispered. Ethan pulled out a letter from the storage unit. 1. James had written to Henry's daughter, Helen, during his first tour. "I saw a kid today, maybe 4 years old, caught in crossfire. Got him to safety, patched him up. Made me think of the family we'll have one day, Helen. I'm fighting so our kids can grow up safe." Henry smiled, eyes closed. That was him, always thinking of others. His breathing slowed and Ethan gripped his hand tighter. "I love you, Grandpa." Henry's eyes opened briefly, lucid and warm. "Love you too, kiddo. You made us proud." Moments later, he slipped away, a peaceful smile on his face. Ethan's grief was raw, but he had no time to mourn. The congressional hearing was set for the following day, and Marvin insisted he attend. "Henry would want you there," he said, gently, "to see this through for your father." Ethan agreed, flying back to DC with Marvin. The hearing room was packed. Journalists, veterans, lawmakers, and a small group of protesters who had managed to secure seats. Hayes, looking frail but resolute, testified first, his voice steady as he recounted Operation Dust Storm. He described James Carter's warning about the trap, his refusal to abandon his men, and the subsequent cover-up orchestrated by Pierce. Red followed, presenting the Bible and James's tape, which was played for the committee. James's voice filled the room, calm and resolute, detailing the mission's flaws and his duty to save lives. Ethan, seated in the gallery, fought back tears as lawmakers listened in rapt silence. Marvin took the stand next, submitting Hayes's 2005 confession and the digitized documents from the storage unit. Finally, Ethan was called. He hadn't expected to testify, but Hayes had insisted his story be heard. Standing before the committee, he felt small but determined. "My name is Ethan Carter," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I never knew my father, James Carter, because he died before I was born. I grew up thinking he was nobody special, because that's what the military told my family. But he was a hero. He saved lives, including Mr. Hayes's. I found the truth because I couldn't let his name stay buried. I'm just a kid, but if I can find the truth, so can you." The room was silent for a moment before applause erupted, quickly silenced by the gavel. A senator leaned forward. "Young man, your courage honors your father's memory. This committee will ensure justice is done." 3 weeks later, the Pentagon issued a formal statement. After a thorough investigation, Sergeant James A. Carter's record was cleared of all charges. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Valor for his actions during Operation Dust Storm. General Kenneth Pierce was stripped of his rank and faced charges for falsifying reports and suppressing evidence. The other men in Carter's unit were also posthumously recognized for their service. Ethan, now back in Philadelphia, attended a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery, where he accepted his father's medal before a crowd of veterans, journalists, and military officials. Hayes, still recovering, laid his own medals at James's corrected headstone, which now read, "Sergeant James A. Carter, medic, hero, died in service, May 17, 1991. Ethan spoke briefly, his voice carried by microphones to the assembled crowd. "Being poor doesn't mean being powerless," he said. "One voice can be heard no matter who tries to silence it. My father's truth is free now, and that's enough." In the months that followed, Marvin's documentary, Unburied Truth, The Redemption of James Carter, premiered to critical acclaim, ensuring the story reached millions. Ms. Thompson created a permanent exhibit at the Philadelphia Public Library, showcasing Ethan's scrapbook of medics alongside James's letters and medals. Back home, Ethan moved in with Mrs. Wilson, who had promised Henry she'd look after him. Sorting through Henry's belongings, Ethan found more of his father's love letters to Helen, revealing a gentle man who dreamed of teaching his son to fish along the Schuylkill River. At a youth summit in Atlanta the following spring, a stranger approached Ethan during a break. "Your story changed my life," the man said, eyes wet. "My dad was in Vietnam, silenced like your father. Because of you, he's talking now." Ethan nodded, clutching the locket around his neck, now holding a photo of James alongside his mother and Henry. On the flight home, staring out at the clouds, Ethan felt his father's presence, not as a shadow, but as a light. The truth had set them both free. What would you risk to uncover a truth the powerful want buried? The answer might reveal a courage inside you, waiting to be discovered. Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge your heart and change how you see the world.